All right, so I'm back. Here's the list that Dr. Bailey and I popped into your Blackboard LMS, Learning Management System. So it'll be a list of the terms or the places or structures or that, whichever that you're going to need to know for the practical. And I know we went over all of these in lab. I was walking around and asking you guys all these questions. So I'm going to grab the brain with the dura mater on it so we'll start down here, okay? I'll go into dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater, and that is from superficial to deep. So remember the dura mater means tough mother. And I'll show you, I literally pick up the brain with the dura mater. You can see how durable it is. And we talked in the lab on Saturday. I talked to the other students Wednesday night. Literally remember that the choroid plexus and the ependymal cells make that cerebrospinal fluid. So not only is it feeding your brain, via your blood plasma, the blood-brain barrier, filtering things out and not letting things in. Remember also that your brain is floating, okay? It's floating in your skull, and you want that because if it wasn't floating, all that pressure would smash the midbrain medulla oblongata. So you want that kind of floating, sort of, just think of it like swimming in a pool. When swimming in a pool, activity generally seems to be easier because things aren't as heavy. You have a little more buoyancy, right? So think about that, and just think about if you were in a car accident or whiplash or you fell or whatever. If your brain didn't have that fluid to take some of that force, the brain would smash against the cranium or the skull, and you damage that neural tissue. And we discussed neural tissue and how central nervous tissue, for the most part, is not, can't go through mitosis, so it can't regenerate. And there's some research out now about stem cells, but for right now, we're going to stick with central dogma and that it can't regenerate, which works for me quite well. All right, so I'm going to hopefully try to get all this in here. So yeah. So I'm going to go over dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. And remember, this is from superficial to deep. Okay, so that probably looks like an alien there a little bit. All right, so this is literally the dura mater. So I'm trying to make sure I record this and see what I'm doing. So, the camera. All right, so that's the inferior portion. All right, dura mater. See how tough that is? And these right here, cranial nerve 2. That's your optic chiasm where they cross over. Remember, the lateral part of this from the lateral visual field stays ipsilateral. The medial is contralateral, crosses over. And we're going to see in the model, and I don't know if I'm going to have time to dissect or pull all this off, but maybe I can show you in the sagittal cut. The pituitary gland is right here. So it's going to be hanging off the infundibulum. And if you have a pituitary adenoma, if it gets really, really large, it can start compressing the optic chiasm, and you can start losing part of your visual field, and you won't know because your brain will literally fill in that image. So it's very important that you all get routine eye exams occasionally so we can check the visual field. And so I'm just going to sort of roll it over. But if you look, I'm literally going to see if I can stick my finger. I'm trying to look through the camera. It's not as easy. But yeah, I'm literally in here, and I can't literally tear this apart. It's that, probably hear that super durable. I could probably pick this thing up. So just realize how durable it is. I'm going to actually peel it off a little bit. Probably should cut this. It's a little barbaric. Let me do that. Assuming that this instructor didn't tell the students how to put this away, but here's your kit. Make sure the blade is down, all right? And these go in here. The handle should be here, so when I reach in, The other day I saw one like this. Blade was up, so when the student or myself went to grab it, you potentially cut yourself. But anyway, it's a number 10 blade, really tiny. Number 22 blade, a little bit bigger. We'll use this probe if we need to, point out some structures or some scissors if we need to cut. But anyway, I'm going to bring this back in here. And sorry for the mess here, but I'm going to try to, I'm going to cut it not looking into the computer, so I don't know if I'm going to be in line with all that. But I just did a really superficial little cut. When you guys get to lab, please be a little more gentle. I really don't want anyone getting cut. I don't want to fill out any paperwork. All right, so this is frontal or anterior to posterior. So when I cut this all off in here, you're going to actually see the cerebellum. Remember, that has 2 L's, so it's going to be for balance. And your cerebellum also has information coming from the brain through the pons here, sends it back to the cerebellum to fine-tune all of your fine motor functions. If you're playing the violin or something really, really delicate, it will process that, and I'll show you on the brain. Go through that. So I guess what I'll do, yeah, I'm gonna just grab the sagittal cut here, have a seat, grab the sagittal cut. I'll go through some of the important structures and kind of what they do. All right, but realize this is what your brain generally looks like. This happens to be a sheep's brain, but just realize it's encased in this dura mater. And if they ask you the order of the tissue from superficial to deep, remember once again, it's dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. And the pia mater literally is, you can probably see it here, it's glistening. It's literally thinner than saran wrap, just covering all those gyri deeper into the sulci. And on Saturday I asked you guys why there were so many involutions in here. And just realize there's involutions to increase the surface area. So you have more and more cortical area. Just give me a moment here. Let me see if I can do this. Standing with the computer in my way, but okay. Frontal, rostral, or posterior. There's that dura mater again. All right, my bad. I have to get out of here soon because someone's gonna need the room, but I'll just show you here on the brain. All right, so when you get to lab, if they have something up here pinned, that's going to be your frontal lobe. All right. And behind that's going to be your parietal. All right, and the posterior is going to be occipital. That's going to be for your vision. Okay. All right, and then I want to really point out the central sulcus here, and that really divides your sensory and your motor cortex. So we were sort of talking in lab, and I said, you know, poor Amanda, I said, Amanda, if I were to come over there and stab you with my pen, would you know, where I stabbed you? And she said, yeah, of course. And I said, well, how would you know? So just realize all that information from your peripheral nervous system goes up through your spinal cord. There's your medulla oblongata, which is where the spinal cord and the brainstem come together. It's also, remember, where you have some respiratory centers, and if they ever ask you, it's where all of your nerves cross over. So from right to left and then left to right. So we talked about the peripheral information from the right side of your body goes to the left side of your brain, and so forth. So the sensory or motor from the left controls the right controls the left. So we talked kind of about the homunculus. And I wanted to point out, here's your brainstem. All right, so this when you're asking a test question, remember your brainstem is very, very basic. So anything that has to do with your super life, surviving, I can't even think of what I want to say. Whatever is absolutely necessary for life. So heart rate, breathing, dilation of blood vessels, and so on. Your base primary functions are going to be in your brainstem. And then that's more like a reptilian brain. And then out here, where my finger is, not quite to the cortex, is going to be your paleo mammalian part of your brain. So a little bit more involved. It's going to really involve your limbic system. And remember, your limbic system was your emotions, how you react to things, the amygdala for fear, and things like that. Your insula would be deep to this. Sorry, we'd have to cut that away for the parts of digestion. But that's going to be really more of your slightly more advanced part of your brain. And then up here, the outer part is your cortex. Cortex means covering, all right? And remember always, I said, week 1, if ever there's a medulla, there's going to be a cortex. Cortex means cap, all right? So whether we're talking about the kidney, the adrenal, medulla, adrenal cortex, or the brain, medulla and cortex come as a kit. It's like salt and pepper. You can't separate them, really. All right, then we'll get into the corpus quadrigemini in here. That's involved with really with sound and hearing, kind of lateralize where that's coming from. And I talked in class about how it's really much more developed in some reptiles and frogs, kind of a survival mechanism. So once again, this is the gyri, are the small parts, and the sulci are going to be deeper, and then we're going to get into the central sulcus, lateral sulcus, longitudinal fissure, transverse fissure, and just really the dividing part. And frontal cortex, parietal, temporal is down here. Temporal, I said, means time, and they named that because men generally gray in the temple area, so temporal. And when we're learning about the skull, I said memorize this as much as you want to grumble, but deep to that is going to be the brain areas, and we're going to have to figure out what they're for. All right, so it's not lecture, but you should know left side of the brain, Broca's area for speech and phonation. Wernicke's is slightly posterior to that. That's going to be more for understanding what is being said to you, more for understanding. All right, so let me go through all this. I'm going to probably, I'm going to grab the list and kind of go down. So I'm working around this camera here, so it's a little bit. All right, so cerebrum is going to be all this area here. Cerebrum is the most developed part, the newest part of the brain. Neocortex is another name they could use for it. These are all cell bodies. All right, and we mentioned in lecture cell bodies were for really processing. So it's going to be your higher cortical region for your executive functions. And remember, I said in lecture that it has to go through the thalamus. The thalamus is going to edit literally 90% of that information. So you really have to know where the thalamus is and realize that it's going to stop 90% of the information from going up further. All right. And then in lecture, we talked about the reticular activating system and how it literally can unplug information from the thalamus going up when you're sleeping. But the minute it is aroused or woken, it sends that information up to the cortex, and you are wide awake. Remember we talked about the phone call at 2:22 a.m. You're going to be wide awake and wondering, what happened? Why am I getting a phone call at 2:22? You're going to be going from asleep to wide awake. So cerebrum, these are gyri, these little invaginations. The deeper ones are sulci. All right, so central sulcus, all right, is exactly what it means. It's kind of be the central part, and it's going to be the dividing part between the sensory and motor components of the homunculus, the little man we talked about. All right, lateral is going to be lateral, okay? Longitudinal is going to be simply that longitudinal. Transverse, it's going to be just, remember those planes, all right? Corpus callosum, remember, if I can find it on here. is literally going to be this area here. And you see how it's white? And this is what connects the left and right side of the brain. All right. So they used to sever this if somebody had a severe, like, grand mal seizures constantly. They would disconnect that because it would fire both sides of the brain at the same time. That's when people go into convulsions and things. And there's, you know, you can look on YouTube, there's documentation of videos of people that they've cut this, all right? And they literally have different interpretations of different things because the left and the right side of the brain don't communicate with each other. So that's kind of interesting to watch. All right. There's your frontal lobe. Pre-central sulcus is going to be for motor. Post is going to be for sensory. So the sensory information comes up, registers here, then you send it forward to the precentral gyrus, and that's going to be for your motor response to that. You're going to send it down here. Then what's happening? It stops at the pons. Remember, we talked about this. It stops at the pons, sends it over here. It's going to reprocess, fine-tune that, and send it back down. And then remember, once again, it crosses over the medulla oblongata, and then it travels down your spinal cord, and then out. If it's motor, remember, it goes out the ventral. If it's sensory coming in, it's dorsal. So the dorsal, there's a dorsal root ganglion where all those cell bodies come together. And in lecture, we talked about shingles and how the virus can sort of hang out in the dorsal root ganglia. It's kind of sequestered from the immune system, and if you're stressed out or your immune system is diminished, it can literally leave, and it can start, it leaves the dorsal ganglion, and it travels down those sensory roots generally, and that's, we talked about the dermatomes, right? So those areas of the skin that are directly linked to that area, and we talked about intercostals. Remember, costal means rib, and how a lot of people are affected in the thoracic area. It comes right out there, and it starts affecting those dermatomes. But you could have it in the ophthalmic division, maxillary division, mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve. So any of these cranial nerves, or any of the nerves in your body, it can hide out in any part of the central nervous system. And then it just, when you're stressed out, it knows your immune system is diminished, and it just leaves, all right? So occipital lobe here is for vision. So I don't know if I have it on here. So there is cranial nerve 2, all right? And when we dissected the eye, I showed you guys the cranial nerve, but a cranial nerve 2 comes out, it's gonna cross the optic chiasm. Remember, once again, lateral fibers stay, ipsilateral, medial fibers cross over, so they go contralateral. It goes out here, and then it goes to the structures, the corpora quadrigemini, means four bodies, I think is what it translates to in Latin. Yeah, and then it's going to send that information back, all right, to the occipital lobe. It has to go through there, and then it sends it back to the occipital lobe there for vision, so you can interpret that light information hits your retina, it goes to your ganglion cells, then your bipolar cells, then through cranial nerve 2. So it has to literally convert light into chemical and electrical signals. They get reprocessed in the corporal quadrigemini, and they get sent to the occipital lobe to make something meaningful. All right, and that doesn't happen the minute you're born, too. You have to kind of figure out what all these images mean and make sense, or make some sense of what they are. All right. Thalamus and hypothalamus. Hypo always means under or lower. And then the pineal gland, we'll find that. Remember, that's for melatonin, all right? And then in lab, I said that there's some scientific research out there right now that's saying that your pineal gland can also make DMT, all right? Pituitary gland, maybe I'll grab this section. That one looks like it's been, all right, pituitary gland should be right where the optic chiasm is. And you'll probably see it on a model better, but pituitary gland is going to be hanging off the infundibulum, all right, right around the optic chiasm. And, lights are out. Hold on. And the pituitary gland is there. There's an anterior and posterior portion is going to be part of your endocrine system. That should be one of the first things they talk about in ANP2 once you get past this. All right. Midbrain is going to be in that area there. Remember, pons is always, it means bridge. It's going to be directly in front of the cerebellum, and that's where that motor information comes down here to the pons. It crosses over, or actually crosses around to the cerebellum. It kind of fine-tunes it. While I'm here, all right, there is the arborvitae, which means white tree, if they ever ask you that. Medulla oblongata. Cerebellum is this area here. Just remember it's got 2 L's for balance, all right? Not really the best for lateral ventricle, third ventricle, or fourth ventricle. I'll grab a model for that. All right, open that up a little. Oh, it's not even on the video. Sorry, guys. Not even in there. So we'll look for the pineal gland way over in here. I'll grab a model and we'll do that. If I have it pinned in lecture, I'll make sure it's pulled apart and pinned as clearly as possible. You want to look for your cerebral aqueduct up in that area. And remember, that's where most of your cerebral spinal fluid is made, by those ependymal cells. Chloride plexus, those areas there. This is getting pretty, yeah, I'll grab a special spinal cord in later. Okay. Wait a second, I'm gonna take these gloves off before I handle that model. So yeah, there's the model. I'll tip this. Try to keep this under half an hour, I believe. All right, frontal lobe. Okay, remember, frontal is going to be, remember we talked about Phineas Gage and how it's your reasoning center, cognition, things like that. Prefrontal, all right? This is be your inhibitory control of behavior, higher intelligence, kind of your right and wrong. So it kind of modifies your behavior if it's working properly, all right? There's that motor sensory area. This is your sensory area. So remember, information is coming up through the spinal cord, has to get through the thalamus to here, registers here. This is where all your sensory information comes from, so you know where things are coming from. If you know you're cut, stabbed, whatever, your fine touch, and we looked at the homunculus, and then you're gonna have a proper response to that. Hopefully you send it anterior here, forward to the motor area. It's gonna relay that information. It's going to send it down. Right. Once again, here's that pons. It means bridge. So you need to see it right in there. It's going to send it around to the cerebrum for fine tuning. Comes down through here, and remember, it's going to cross over at the medulla oblongata for that, to go to the opposite part of the body. All right, this is your parietal lobe here. You want to look at it here. All right. Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into Broca's and Wernicke's here, because technically this isn't the left side of the brain. Not that it's always there, but generally more than 95% of the time it's left-sided for hearing. You can talk about the association hearing areas and things like that. So this is kind of your midbrain for your arousal and wakefulness. It has to also do with your reticular activating system. And then down here is, once again, is your occipital. Your occipital lobe is down here. That's going to be for vision. So it's coming in through cranial nerve 2. Has to come back through here. There's a mammillary body. Has to come around. It goes to the corpus quadrigemini, and then it goes to the occipital lobe for processing. There we go. That's the mammillary body there. Optic chiasm. Yeah, there's your cranial nerve 1, olfactory. There's cranial nerve 2, sensory for seeing. The optic chiasm should be there. You can go through the cranial nerves, look at pictures of them. They're going to come off of the pons, the brainstem. All right. Remember what the exception was that drops down. All right. Remember vagus? So those are some of your cranial nerves. Corpus callosum connects the right and left hemispheres. Right, that's a super important structure. All right, pineal glands over in this area here. And like I said, if I pin any of this, I'll be sure to make sure that it's pinned properly. The choroid plexus is up in this area. Not good on this model, but I'll show you. That's going to be for your cerebrospinal fluid. There's an aqueduct, all right? No, for that cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. This one's a little better, right? So it literally has all those cranial nerves. Remember, they're numbered from 1 through 12, from superior to inferior. There is your model representation of your pituitary gland for all of your hormones. There's the infundibulum, is that little string that's coming off of it. All right, number 21 there, when you see it, that is your hypothalamus. Remember I said hypo means under. So the thalamus, we're going to be looking for the thalamus is going to be higher. And in this model, it's literally labeled 19. All right. And thalamus, remember, we said it's going to be editing 90% of all that sensory information coming up through here. So it can't get to that sensory portion of your brain, post-central sulcus, right, to the homunculus. But if it does, that means you had enough action potentials to literally get past the executive cephalopory here and get the information higher. This, once again, is the corpus callosum, connects the left and right side of the brain. All right. So this structure right here is the choroid plexus. All right, and I remember I said they're going to ask you what makes cerebrospinal fluid. So it's going to be the ependymal cells, or more specifically, this is going to be the area the choroid plexus makes the majority of that cerebrospinal fluid. All right, so 23 right here is your pineal gland. It looks really, really tiny. Once again, that is for your circadian rhythm, melatonin, all right? And like I said, there's some proof that it can produce DMT, all right? What else do I want to point out here? Oh, yeah. 34 is your aqueduct. So aqueduct, just, you know, it's a canal, as the word implies, for the cerebrospinal fluid. This should be the ventricle. Yeah, fourth ventricle right here. Asking you right there for it. So arborvitae means white tree. Cerebellum, pons, that big area here. It kind of looks like an olive. All right. I think that's how we learned it in grad school. Pretty sure. It's like 25 years ago. But there is your medulla oblongata. Remember, brainstem, spinal cord, where they come together, should be right there. Should be right through the foramen magnum. Right. Once again, here, start learning these portions here. All right, temporal lobe. All right, this right here is the pre-central. There's a central sulcus. This divides sensory and motor. There's your prefrontal lobe, your frontal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe. I hope that was in focus. Not really sure. Okay, I'm going to end it there because it looks like I'm just under half an hour. Hopefully this time I'll have sound so I can send something appreciable out. All right. And then when we get back, maybe I'll throw this guy up. And we also have this model. All right, so you can get a little bit more appreciable idea of your brain. External auditory medius. All right. So you can get some proportionality. Right. Then we can look in through here. There's your cranial nerves coming down here. All right, pretty simplistic. But I'm going to pop that guy right back in there. Yeah, I saw him in the catalog and thought I wanted him. So now we got him. All right.